Okay. Welcome to this webinar. Welcome to those of you who are here with us in Rome and those of you in connection from different parts of the world. Thank you to the personnel of UISG for hosting this session, to our speakers and to our translator. I am Sister Armida Veglio, a member of the UISG Commission for Dialogue, which has organized this seminar. The remit of the Commission includes dialogue with other faiths, Christian-Jewish dialogue, ecumenism, as well as all areas where dialogue is a necessary means of moving forward in peace. The purpose of the Commission is to promote dialogue, to provide a platform for discussion and study, and to organize initiatives to spread a culture of dialogue among religious. We want to promote dialogue in such a way that it is the background to all that we do, that dialogue, and in particular interreligious dialogue, is a core theme for formation programs, so that wherever we minister, we are able to truly enter into relationship, while at the same time respecting our own identity and our own faith. We are always learning how to actively listen to others, how to be open to each other's situation, to listen with the heart as well as the mind. In 2015 in Kenya, Pope Francis said, "Ecumenical and interreligious dialogue is not a luxury. It is not something extra or optional, but essential. Something which our world, wounded by conflict and division, increasingly needs." In 2016, he said, "If there is one word that we should never tire of repeating, it is this: dialogue." We are called to promote a culture of dialogue by every possible means, and thus to rebuild the fabric of society. Our topic for today is hospitality and contemplation in the context of Christian-Buddhist dialogue. Hospitality, because when we dialogue, we welcome the other into our experience as a guest. And likewise, we are received as a guest to experience the faith and understanding of the other. Contemplation, because to dialogue we need an open heart, a listening heart, a receptive heart. It is particularly significant that we are having this webinar today while the Holy Father is in Thailand and on his way to Japan. Thailand is a 90% Buddhist country, and dialogue between Christian and Buddhists have been going on for hundreds of years, especially in the dialogue of life. The speakers we have today have had their main experience in Christian-Buddhist dialogue and in a monastic setting. Two were participants and organizers of the first joint international conference between consecrated Christian and Buddhist women that took place in Kaohsiung in Taiwan last year. And two have had much experience in Japan. Our three speakers are Sister Wei Wei, a Mercedarian sister who is joining us from Taiwan and will speak in Mandarin with translation into English. Father William Skudlarek, a Benedictine in the USA, and Father Peter Baekelmans, CICM, the Executive Secretary of SEDOS, who is here with us in Rome. We have asked the speakers to introduce themselves. That is why I haven't mentioned very much about them so far. To introduce themselves and their own experience in the area of interreligious dialogue. They will have 5 minutes each for that. We will then turn to 2 questions. What did you learn from your experience and studies regarding hospitality and contemplation in Buddhism, and the relation between Christianity and Buddhism? Again, each speaker will have 5 minutes. And then the last question, what are the problems that you perceive concerning interreligious dialogue? Again, 5 minutes. So we will hear each speaker in turn on each of those topics. And then after the contributions, we will have time for questions and discussion. Thank you. So I would like, first of all, to ask Father Peter Baekelmans to introduce himself and his experience in interreligious dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I have to get used a bit to the webinar situation, but I'm very happy to be able to share a bit the work, the thoughts I had during the years on dialogue, the experiences. And it started as a young boy, just at home, being born in a very Roman Catholic family, 10 children, every day to Mass, is there where you learn the taste of religion. Sometimes people these days don't have even that taste anymore, no? But it is through that love for your own religion that normally one should be able also to love another religion. But that's not always the case. And I was also taught by my father in the time a bit discrimination towards other religions. I tried when I was 20, I saw that thought, and I tried myself to better that one and to overcome the fear for other religions and to love them, to see the beauty of it. And that was especially done by my Jewish teacher. When I was 20, I started to study in Switzerland, among others, comparative religion. And then I started also later on to specialize in comparative religion. And through that, I learned the beauty of other religions. I had a Jewish teacher. When at the end of my studies, I asked him, with a spiritual teacher, can I study theology? I was thinking already to become a priest. He told me, oh, pity, I thought you would become a Jew. But he did that smilingly and he accepted, no? And so I started my work then studying after comparative religion. I felt that it was not only a matter of mind, but I also started to see that it was more than only studying. It was also being a person, a religious person, and a person for other religions also. And so there I entered cicm, and I came to Japan. I found that vocation clear when I was in Thésée, a place for ecumene in France, and with seeing Father Frère Roger, in the way he talked with the young people, it attracted me very much, and there I decided to become a priest, religious at least, being not married, a celibate person. And so I was sent by my congregation to Japan because of my love for dialogue, and we had our conference working there in dialogue. And I was so happy to be in Japan, eating Japanese, listening to Japanese music, but also going to Japanese temples, Japanese shrines, and my conferences were not very much used to that. I know that sometimes I heard someone saying, oh, Peter, he wants to become a Buddhist priest. And they meant it really. I never even thought on that one, no? But so the dialogue with other religions was not directly understood by the conference, but after a time they were happy. And even then they asked me the cooperation for newcomers to bring them to the temples, to give them an experience of, for instance, meditation in Zazen, the rituals in Shingon. So I myself went regularly to, especially the Zazen meditation, the Zen tradition of the Rinzai school, and to Shingon Esoteric Buddhist Temple in Koyasan, where for the Zen I did in the end the whole training till the most difficult religious exercise they have, and that is the Rohatsu. 10 days, not sleeping, only sitting on your ass and going to the Zen teacher for instruction, confession, whatever you want to call it. No? And then I did also the whole education to Shingon Buddhist priest. I only did not the last moment, that is the last initiation, because then it becomes real. And I said, yeah, no, that is difficult. I was in the meantime already a Catholic priest, and it's difficult to serve two religious traditions, and especially through two religious communities at the same time. But so I did that experience, and then I did with that also the studies of it. I studied, I did my comparative religion before, then I did theological studies in Belgium, Louvain, and in Nanzan University in Japan. I did the Buddhist studies in Koyasan, and then I came back to Nanzan to do a doctorate on the comparison between our Christian sacraments and the Buddhist rituals, especially of the Shingon school. Not the form, but the way they think about it, the reasoning, the theology behind. And I was able there to get a connection really between our Christian sacramentology and the Buddhist rituology. But that maybe we have to speak later on. Oh, but I will say already here, the beauty of rituals. That's a bit what I came to understand. I think 5 minutes are finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Peter. Thank you. Now we would like to welcome Sister Wei Wei to please introduce yourself. We're very happy that you've been able to connect with us. Introduce yourself and explain a little bit about your experience in the area of interreligious dialogue. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to share. Actually, I was born and educated in Buddhism and mixed with the Taoism family. Till now, I'm still the only one Catholic in my family. Because in Taiwan, the Catholic congregation is very low, not reach 1%. So actually, I have been used to living dialogue with other people, other religions. My family background, my grandparents, they are Taoism. Even every summer, my grandfather stay in the Taoism temple for contemplation for 2 months. And my father and my mother, till now, they are quite a pious Buddhist. And many of my friends, they also are Buddhism mixed Taoism, popular religiosity. So the situation is different from majority of Catholic people. So actually, I'm not an expert in this field, only living dialogue with others. But in the past many years, more than 22 years, I have been working as a social worker, as the director of a Jesuit social center. I'm used with the migrant workers, the poor people, the labor, and indigenous people. So I'm interested in this topic, hospitality and contemplation, because how the Buddhism, they look at migrants, look at the poor, look at the marginal people, and what's their belief related, connect to this. So through the topic, I dialogue with some friends, even some Buddhist nun, to share their point of view. So perhaps later I will share some with all of you.
Thank you very much. And now, welcome to Father William from United States. Thank you very much for agreeing to be part of this webinar. And we look forward to hear your introduction and your experience in this area. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Buonasera a tutti e a tutte. And I would have to say that my background, my experience in interreligious dialogue came rather late in life. I'm from a small village not very far from the monastery where I'm a member now, a very Catholic community. And so I grew up not having any friends, any acquaintances who were not Catholic. I came to the monastery in I came here to school before, but I entered the monastery in 1958. And when I began my studies in theology in 1960, a book had just come out, an English translation of a book by Jean-Marie Deschanel, who wrote a book on his experience of yoga, which he began as more of an aid to his health. He suffered from epilepsy, and he found that to be very advantageous. The book, La Voix du Silence, was translated into English as Christian Yoga, and I began reading that book and began practicing, I suppose, a bit of yoga, but it was really more of a physical exercise than a religious exercise. But that may have been where the seed was planted. After my studies, my studies were in the area of homiletics and liturgy. I came back here and taught in our seminary, eventually becoming the rector of the seminary. And I asked my abbot for the possibility of doing some pastoral work, which I thought I needed for my work with seminarians. And he wanted me to go into one of our parishes. I said that would be a possibility. I would like to do it, however, in an intercultural context. That meant I spent 5 years in Brazil as an associate of Maryknoll. And I have to say that when I mentioned to my abbot I wanted to do it in an intercultural context, this pastoral experience, he said, well, I could send you to Japan. We have a monastery in Japan. And I said, Father Abbot, that's the last place in the world I'd want to go to. I came back from Brazil after 5 years in 1990, and 3 years later, another abbot asked me to go to our foundation in Japan. And at that point, I was ready to accept. I thought I'd had 5 years of experience working with a church that was trying to give priority in its outreach to the poor, and I felt now I had a chance to experience that other great challenge of the church, to be in relationship with the great religions of the East. So I arrived in Japan in 1994, and my second day there, I went to see William Johnston, the Jesuit who had written so much about Christianity and Zen, and asked him what I could do. And he put me in touch with the Sanbo Kyodan, which was a kind of a new Zen Buddhist organization that welcomed foreigners as well as Japanese. And I began training in Zazen there. It was not a very formal training because of my pastoral responsibilities in Japan. I wasn't always able to go to their Sunday Zazenkai, but I did as often as I could. And well, till this day, I'm still sitting. I think that was the main thing I learned from the Japanese Zen experience. just sit, shikantaza. I was in Japan when the first Gethsemane conference, that big international meeting of Christians, Catholics, and Buddhists, took place at Gethsemane Abbey. I was there as an observer in 1996. That brought me to the attention of the organizer of monastic interreligious dialogue in the United States, Sister Meg Funk. She invited me to come on to the board of monastic interreligious dialogue. I did that in 1997. And 10 years later, I was invited by Father Pierre de Béthune, the first Secretary General of Monastic Interreligious Dialogue, to assume that position. So I've been the Secretary General, which means I'm responsible to the Benedictine Confederation for promoting interest in dialogue with other religions of monks and nuns from the monastic tradition of Catholicism. So that's been my experience these past 12 years. I just accepted another 3-year appointment, so I'll be doing this for probably another 3 years or so. As I say, my main role now is to encourage, to help organize dialogue on various levels, local, national, international, not only now with Buddhists, and that has been the primary focus we've had in the past, but ever more now with Muslims as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Father William. And we'd like to ask you to continue now with the second question. What did you learn from your experiences and studies regarding hospitality and contemplation in Buddhism and the relation between Christianity and Buddhism? Thank you.
Okay, well, as I already said, I think the first thing I learned was how to sit. This group that I was associated with, the Sanbo Kyodan, is a kind of a mixture of Rinzai and, why can't I even think of the word right now, but of the two main traditions of Zen Buddhism, Soto. But I think what I experienced at the Sanbo Kyodan and then with other sesshin, these intensive meditation retreats, is just how welcoming the Buddhists were to this foreigner, this Christian who came to them really knowing very little at all about their tradition. Their patience, their acceptance, but also their willingness to correct. And I think that was an instance of hospitality too. Benedict says in his rule that monasteries are to welcome traveling monks if they prove that they are not able to accept anything in that community, well, then they might be politely asked to leave. But then he goes on to say, but if with charity and patience they point out something that this community is lacking, the community should, and the abbot should regard him as someone sent by God for that very purpose. So that sense of hospitality, meaning openness, welcoming, readiness to listen, readiness to respond, but also the readiness to point out faults, errors, and to do that with patience and charity. The other thing that I would put in terms of hospitality and interreligious dialogue, hospitality and contemplation with interreligious dialogue, is something that Father Pierre de Béthune has said. He works very much with the area of hospitality and interreligious dialogue. And in a film that we made about monastic interreligious dialogue about 3-4 years ago called La Voix d'Hospitalité, or the English Strangers No More, so it's a combination French and English with subtitles in either language. I just would like to quote something that he said in that film because I think it puts it so well. He says, if you are deeply rooted in your tradition, as can be expected of a monk who has been formed over many years, you don't have to be afraid of immersing yourself in another religious tradition. It's not a question of compromise, saying, I'll accept this, but not that. No, I accept everything, but I accept it with all that is mine, all that is my own. It's a meeting from faith to faith, or more exactly, from fidelity to fidelity. So I think that's important in dialogue, whether that's dialogue of life, dialogue of religious traditions, dialogue of theological thought, dialogue of social action, is to be willing to accept everything that other religion offers us, that other religious tradition, spiritual tradition offers us. But we accept it as Christians. That is who we are. We don't reject anything, but we look for ways of incorporating it, of being open to it, of being receptive to it. There will be at times certain things we say, well, no, I understand, but I'm not quite sure I can go there. Let me just give one example. In a recent dialogue, but now this one was with Muslims, a dialogue on the unity of God and unity in God. One of the Muslim participants said, I now can see that when Christians speak of God as Trinity, that is a way of speaking of God, the one God, using triune language. I don't remember his exact terms. He says, I don't really understand what that's all about, but I can accept that Christians are not polytheists. I can now see that. I always thought Christians were polytheists when they spoke of the Trinity, but now I see that they're not. And he said, while I can't understand that, and I really can't necessarily agree with it, I can accept it coming from you. So I think that is an expression of hospitality. That is an expression of hospitality as contemplation, as being receptive, open, and in the moment and attentive.
Thank you very much indeed, Father William, for that contribution. And I'd like to ask Father Peter now to respond to the same question.
Thank you. The question I have divided in three parts. First is the one about hospitality, the second one is about contemplation, and the third is about the relation between the two. When I speak about my experience in going to the temples, I found myself always very much received well by the Japanese, not always by the foreigners who are there, but the Japanese themselves. They were very happy that I came there, and they accepted me because I am a religious, I am in a sense a monk. They accepted me also as one of them, which made sometimes the difficulty when there was a big prayer in the temple, for instance, with the Zen, and there were first the sutras, the singing in the temple. I was asked to sit with the monks so that the voices are good. No, not that my voice is so good, but the more the better. But then when it came to the time for the meal, I was seated with the hosts. Then I was not anymore the monk. Then I had to play for the guest. And so you have sometimes to play several roles at the same time. But I was always happy for that hospitality. And then for sure that I was also able to do the religious practices and to join in everything what they offer. That was for me always a beauty, but at the same time also a question to our tradition. When someone wants to experience what is baptism without getting baptized, without becoming fully Christian, no? Did we ever educate someone in a seminary without that he becomes a priest in the end and that he's from another tradition? I know that there are people who ask sometimes for that from other traditions to have the experience, and it would help the dialogue also, but sometimes we are a bit too strict on possibilities like that. So the spiritual exchange between monks is a very nice one where people can have the experience from the both sides. Then the other aspect is the contemplation. The contemplation, I see two aspects which I learned very much. And the first one was about mantras, mantra recitation, recitation of a word or a sentence over and over again. And even if you don't understand it, you just have to repeat it. In the Indian one, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. In Japanese, Om Saraswati Soaka, Om Saraswati Soaka. And I could not bring myself to do that from my Western scientific mind that asks me to know before I do. But in the Eastern mind, it is you do before you understand. So they turn it upside down, and in the Zen temple, you're not allowed to study the sutras before you have practiced for 10, 15 years. So there is another way to do, and when I was able to start practicing the mantras, I started to understand much better the Shingon esoteric Buddhist tradition, which is Shingon means, is in fact the Japanese translation of the Indian word mantra. So that was one point, and the other point of the contemplation is that I learned to see the beauty of rituals, but also that the rituals are in essence mystical rituals. And that's what I tried to defend in my doctoral thesis, that we are linked on the level of religion or rituals between the religions as mystical rituals. Mostly we look even at our sacraments as magic. No? You do something and then you will be healed. But the essence is behind that, doing something to get something, the mystical aspect, the union that you get with God, with Jesus, with Mary, with others. And it is through that mystical experience, mystical link, that things will work out. And that we call ex opere operato. In the Buddhist Shingon tradition, they call that the three mysteries. However you call it, the idea behind is the same, that it is not me who is doing the rituals, it is God, it is the Buddha. So that is something on the level of contemplation that I learned. And then the relation between the two, I was thinking, is that one becomes more hospitable through contemplation. If your contemplation is real, and the deeper it becomes, the more you should be able to dialogue, to be open for others. And even though they might think fully different, you are ready to enter into that thinking. And there, I think it is of Ryokan. I remember a poem where he writes very beautifully that, and it is a Zen Buddhist, but Buddhism is a combination of Taoism and Buddhism. So there is also the Chinese influence, good for Sister Wei Wei. And that is that there is that flower and the bee. And he says, when the bee comes to the flower opens. When the flower opens, the bee comes. Which comes first, we don't know. But he says, the same isn't it the same as we humans? When we meet each other, we also open for each other. And that is in fact, in Taoism is always taught the natural way of doing. If you're really a natural human being, without all the complex in our mind, we would be able to open to others. And in our Christian setting, we would call it a spiritual dimension of dialogue, that where we work on ourselves, that we can be spontaneous as children are spontaneous. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Peter. Now, Sister Wei Wei, we would like to ask you also to respond to this question, what you have learnt of hospitality and contemplation in Buddhism and the relation between Christianity and Buddhism. So 5 minutes again for this contribution. Thank you.
好，谢谢。
Thank you. I will share about from the Taoism, Buddhism. I will share their thoughts. Chinese, mainstream religious Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism are mutually influential. Displayed in language, cosmos, sacrifices, it is intervened. The Buddhist language, limit, age, support has entered the life of people. Especially contemplative and in China is the famous mountain. The name is Huangshan. Similarly, the Buddhism is important to welcome the people. The master always stands at the port to welcome the people. For all people, there's important thoughts. According to contemplate, hospitality. What is karma? For them, they are important. Everything has the potential to live and improve in the world. Everything is front, first, and last. According to the hospitality, Buddhists, they always separate different. They said everybody equal in the world. There are three elements. One is compassionate. One is died by in, live by in, all return to the nature. Attachment for the Buddhists very important. The first or make a good relationship with others before become Buddhist. There are many ways to get along. For example, pay attention to the people, just attaching to him with eyes. Used by others is also a kind of faith. The people should not only be afraid of being used by others. Don't be afraid to share something with the people, because people with people are interrelated. Each other is a combination. In every temple, there are important things to welcome the people, to understand the people. The first things of Buddhism is hospitality. They should to know who is the guest, what is the character, what are they need, how should I welcome him, to respective, arrange him, let them to feel at home. Sometimes, to every people, we have to understand them, to talk with them. When they arrive in the temple, to leave them to incense in the God. When time to eat, they will prepare good dishes for them. Let them to know they are very important in everybody. So hospitality in Buddhist, they serve for three levels. One is best monk. They can talk with somebody, they can share with them problem, to be patient, to be compassionate. Important, they have the patience with the people. The middle, to visit the people, to get them to visit temple. The last, the deaf, so only to see the guests, to rush them to eat, only to worship Buddha. But they have nothing to do. So the people who will be the one to welcome the guests. So in the world, the people who are marginalized in society, through the Buddhism, they believe in the Buddhism, everybody we can be Buddha. Through their emotion, they can be conversion. Through the good master, they can learn everything impossible to maintain the three treasures for whole life. From the Buddhists, I learned why they always offer the money to take care the master, because they have good relationship with everybody. They help to each other. That is important for me. I am attracted by this emotion. God is love. We have to love everybody, union with God. Through them, I accept everybody, especially the who is the way, who is long away from us. Especially they need to help in the spirituality. We always attracted by outside, by different situation, different education. Through the contemplation, Buddhism, they said, everybody we are same, equal in the eyes of God. We are the image of God. So we had to make a long dialogue with them. We had to learn from them in Yuan. Everything we have compact in together, because God is our Lord. God created us. We are all brothers and sisters in God. Used by others for them it's not the good things. Maybe we lost the money, but for us, we thought it's the good things for us. We died in Christ, we rise in Christ. We can communicate with each other. This is we started from this content.
And could we ask you now to continue, please, with the last question? What are the problems that you perceive concerning interreligious dialogue? Thank you.
Okay.
I saw our We are Catholic. The spirituality is imitate Jesus, to love, to unite with God in the service. Especially we service to the foreigner, we serve to the manager. But I share with the Buddhists, they thought this is the only is kind of service. We make good relationship with others to help them. They believe that is good things for them. For them, important they treat them by self. So through the other things, in our Catholic, there is an original thing and our self thing. Sometimes there is a selfish. It's difficult for us to accept others. The all things block. But the Buddhism, they are not talking about the things. They are only talking about the yin yuan. They have turned to generation talk about the yin yuan. Sometimes we see outside, we see the immigrants, we see the poor. For us, that's the thing. We need to improve the problem. That is not the thought of God. Buddhism, they are not in talk about like this, talking about many things. They believe we can improve by ourselves. They don't complain everything. There's a spirituality of Buddhism, contemplative. They are different with us. In the dialogue, we always share about the Buddhist and Catholic. How do we deal with the problem? When to make good relationship with others. If everybody, we have to improve ourselves. Everybody we can do good things for the others. So that is the highest level for the spirituality. We need a long time to contemplate, to practice. If we open ourselves, we can find different way to deal our problem, to dialogue with them. This is my experience. Thank you very much.
I see myself here, so I presume I'm up next because I didn't hear what you said, sister. But With regard to problems, let me begin by a little anecdote. When I went to Japan in 1994, the person who taught kanji was Father Deru, a Belgian priest who had spent much time in China. And he mentioned in one of his classes that so often people who come to Japan to live there want to write a book about what Japanese culture is all about and how it differs from or is similar to the culture that they come from. He said, my advice to you is do that book in your first year in Japan, because the longer you're here, the less you will understand. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges to dialogue, is we sometimes presume that we understand the other and start talking to them as if we're on the same wavelength, and we might be on completely different wavelengths. Another anecdote, one of our theology professors here said at the end of a term, he was reviewing the course to help the students prepare for their final exams, and then he finished and said, now, are there any questions? And one of the students from somewhere in the East, I don't remember if it was Japan or China, said, yes, Father, what is this God you've been talking about all semester? So again, he was teaching as if we were speaking a common language, and that wasn't true at all. The other problem, I don't know if I want to say problem so much as challenges perhaps, to interreligious dialogue, is that the academic model of dialogue has so dominated the scene that it almost seems to push aside any other model. And by academic model, I mean you get scholars who come together and deliver papers, and then they're discussed, and then you go home. And that is an important element of dialogue, that level of theological dialogue. But at least for monastic interreligious dialogue, the emphasis is on the dialogue of spiritual experience. And so to try to find ways to make that more present, more dominant, and not just always think of dialogue in terms of an academic scholastic conference. You see that it's actually a kind of a quilt on the wall behind me. That perhaps was my best experience of dialogue. A Buddhist monk and I simply walked together for a week, begging for our food and our lodging, and really, at times conversing with one another, but often walking together in silence. I in my religious garb, he in his religious garb. It was a moving and memorable experience of dialogue. It happened about 10 years ago. And I think looking for other ways to practice this dialogue of religious sharing, religious experience. I might also mention that this particular monk, Jyotipalo, he's an American monk, some years ago, because of the proximity of their monastery to a Byzantine monastery, became interested in icons. He was an art major in college. This past year, he spent a year here in an institute we have for scholars, deepening his understanding of the Eastern tradition of writing icons so that he could incorporate that into Buddhist art. And again, that's another level of dialogue, the dialogue of artistic expression that can really say so much about what it is that we understand our identity as Christians to be, how often that is expressed in art and in music. And on that level too, there's a possibility of sharing. And then I think it's necessary to say that one of the difficulties, problems, challenges of this kind of dialogue at the level of spiritual experience, is that it's not easy to talk about our own spiritual experience. We guard that. We may share that with a spiritual director. And I think we're often not very confident of the depth or integrity of our own religious experience. And so we're hesitant to share that, especially with, quote unquote, the outsider. And so those are some of us. So I say I prefer to think of challenges. They can be problematic, of this level of dialogue, this contemplative level of dialogue, this level of dialogue that wants to be receptive, open, hospitable to the religious convictions and practices of other traditions. Thanks.
Thank you, Father William, and thank you for opening up that question of dialogue on a spiritual level. Now I'd like to hand over to Father Peter for his contribution to this question.
Thank you very much. It's indeed problems or challenges, and we should also speak about the joy of the dialogue, but we'll end with the problems in the hope that we can turn them into joys. I jotted down 4 for me that I saw rapidly, and the first one is that dialogue should be done in a true and sincere way and not in a hypocritical way. I was last at a big meeting of different religions, but then you wonder yourself, why did that person came to speak? Was it because he had to do his job? Was it to get money? Sometimes you see people who wants to come to the Pope to get a picture for their tradition, to make it more known and intercultural, international. No, but that's not the reason we do that. No? So to be in a sincere way, taking part in the dialogue is a challenge, but is needed. The second point is the need to know the other before you collaborate in actions. The dialogue of action is nice, but if you don't know the other, it can be very unnice to the other person also. We had a meeting of Buddhist scholars with theologians in Firenze, in Italy here, and they had organized a Eucharist where the Buddhists would be welcome. I said to the organizers, I said, very well, very, very nice, but don't forget my friend Buddhist, the main guy in the group, he used to go to communion when he goes to the Eucharist. They say, oh no, that's not possible, that's not possible. Yeah. I said, then you have to prepare and see how he cannot go to communion and then, no? And so I proposed that we give first a blessing by the priest. We let the Buddhist priests come to the fore and we give them a blessing, which is normal in Japan. Everyone can come for a blessing. And then we will distribute the communion when they are back in their seat. No? And that way it was nice. What I did not think of at that moment, the Buddhist priests were scholars, but they came to the Mass, they entered with us into the sacristia, they changed the clothings and they became Buddhist priests. And so we had a Catholic priest blessing a Buddhist priest in his clothes. No, that was very nice to see, but they did not dare to show these pictures in Japan. No. Now, a third thing is that there is a need for common rituals. I had a friend, Japanese friend, whose father had passed away. He was from a Buddhist temple, but the last 10 years he was going to a Protestant church. But because he never inscribed himself in the Buddhist temple and his family was Buddhist, the family came and said, no, we want a Buddhist ritual. But then all these people from the Protestant church, they said, but we like also to give a funeral to our friend, no? And so it was decided that the first day there would be a Buddhist funeral and the second day there would be a Christian funeral. But it's pity that these things cannot be together. No? And surely for a funeral, it's not a sacrament, so it's not a sacrilege to do it together. No? So there is a kind of need. I did for my first Mass, I invited a Buddhist priest and a Hindu teacher, and they were asked also to take part in certain ways with their own tradition in the Eucharist, while respecting our Eucharist, being open for other religious traditions. Vatican II created the openness in an intellectual way, but not in a liturgical way yet. That's a place where we still have to work on. And then the last one is the need for respect and openness. Respecting, we heard here in Rome just a few weeks ago that there are still people who throw religious images of other religious traditions into the river. It's not a new thing, it has been done for centuries already, and it is not the right thing to do. That is not the way to show your respect. But then there is also, from our side, the openness for other religious traditions. No? The church has very much difficult to accept that a person does meditation, does zazen, yoga, like Father William, but also me. It's not a sin to do these things. But, like he mentioned, Pierre de Bethune, you have to do it as a Christian. That's the difference. And it's only you who does that in your heart that can say that you do it as a Christian. The outside might be fully the same, but you do it as a Christian. You know, when I reflect on the 13th, 14th century, when there was a good communication, dialogue among Jews, Christians, and Muslims, we as Christians learned from the Muslims the value of mantra, you can say, of prayer. Yeah? And we started with the rosary. No? If we would in that time have said, no, you cannot do the mantra, you cannot use a rosary and then just saying the words of Maria, Maria, Maria without any thinking. No? If we would have said it in that time, we would have not a rosary, which is one of our main Catholic prayers, no? The way of prayer. So that openness, so that also we can have new religious forms in our own tradition that are also linked with other religious traditions. So that's a bit my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all our speakers. I think that last question is particularly important because it's very easy to talk about the positive parts, the joys of interreligious dialogue, but we have to face up always to the difficulties, the challenges as well. So thank you very much for those contributions. We have some time now for questions. If you would like to ask a question, then please give your name, your congregation, and where you are speaking from, and to whom you would like to address your question. And I would like to also invite our speakers to participate if they would like to make any comments or further contribution, particularly on what they've heard from the other speakers. Thank you.
If I can ask one question to Sister Wei and one question to Father William. And the first, the question to Sister Wei is, have you ever been reproached by your family members for being a Christian? That is one thing I was wondering about. And to Father William, it is indeed true that we have to accept everything with a Christian, but as a Christian. But in my experience, I always try to keep something that I don't do in the other tradition, to show that I'm also not fully a Buddhist, a Zen, a Shingon priest, no? I keep some limits, for myself more than for the other, but to keep that I'm dialoguing and that I'm not fully them. But I know it is a bit difficult. Thank you.
Sister?
Okay, yes. My parents, before, when I made a vow, final vow, I invited them to be present to my Eucharist. They joined, but afterwards, actually, they participate our celebration, Eucharist celebration, for several times. But for them, they felt very difficult because our liturgical language are quite different from the Chinese culture. The many terms for the ordinary people, they cannot understand. And also in the liturgy, sometimes standing, sometimes kneel down, and for them it's too complicated. So in the last, my father in the last years in his life, he said he understand, he like the Catholic Christian, our way of being with people, but for them they said too complicated regarding to the ritual. They don't understand. They feel out of place. So in the end of his life, he said he would like to go back to the religion he feel familiar. So I think it is many local people, Chinese people, I think our expression, no matter the words, the way of our liturgy, many things for the Chinese, they are foreign religion, so quite different to make people feel at home. So this, and my grandmother, and she was baptized at the age of 80, and I introduced her to have a catechism from one of our sister. So some like to listen to the catechumen, and some she understood, but when she heard Jesus is God, and also Jesus is a human being, she felt very difficult to understand. She said, human being is a human being, God is God, how come? So finally we said, okay, you are old, the only if you believe, that's okay. So finally she want to become a Catholic. So I know many our catechism for the local people also is difficult to understand, to accept. Even she went to the church, the offering, the donation during the Mass, she could not understand. I tried to explain the term, the Catholic term, donation, but she could not understand. So finally, she used a traditional Buddhism term, 化缘, and then I said more or less similar, and then she was very happy. So that means we need more ways, approaches for dialogue, even for evangelization. It is my family experience. Thank you.
In response to Father Peter's question, again, let me recount an experience I had. My first experience of the Zazenkai at the Sanbo Kyodan in Kamakura. I arrived when they were doing the kinin, that walking meditation. And again, this was totally new to me. I saw it and I thought, oh, all I could think of was they looked like zombies walking around. And I was not at all attracted to it. But I said, I'm here, so I will take part. So we sat in meditation for some time. And then came the time for the recitation of the Bodhisattva vow and the prostrations to the Buddha. And everyone is falling on their knees with their forehead to the floor, lifting up their hands. And I thought, oh my, I don't know if I can do this. This is idolatrous. But I was there and I did it. But I felt really uncomfortable about it and bad about it. And then we were instructed on how to approach the Roshi for our private dokusan with him. And I found out that they bowed to the Roshi in the same way they bowed to the image of the Buddha. And my interpretation of that bowing as an act of worship was completely wrong. It was an act of respect for a great teacher. And I think that goes, that's one example, but I think it often is how we interpret the meaning of another ritual or another act. That may be accurate, but is not necessarily accurate until we get to know it better. I liked very much what you said about the importance of finding ways to incorporate rituals from another religious tradition, symbols from another religious tradition into our own liturgical or devotional acts. So often, any attempt to do that is met by an accusation of syncretism or relativism. That you are not respecting the integrity of our own ritual traditions. And yet, even a very rudimentary knowledge of the evolution of liturgical traditions in Roman Catholicism or in Christianity shows how often it was a way of incorporating cultural and religious traditions that were not Christian in their origins. Even such things as a genuflection, that comes from Roman and Byzantine court ritual. So I think there is a possibility of, being too uncritical. There has to be a certain element of criticism, of critical response to those traditions, but that I think also needs to involve dialogue to be sure that we really understand what those other traditions are all about before we uncritically would accept them. But as I say, so often these other traditions, these other ways even of speaking, of theological or philosophical attempts to explain sound so different from ours because they are in response to different questions. Again, there's a person in this film that I mentioned, La Voix d'Hospitalité, Strangers No More, which can be found on our Monastic Interreligious Dialogue website. This was a French monk from Ancalca, Frère Daniel, who said that religious traditions are responses from God to human questions, to human search. And if the questions are different, if the concerns are different, if the search is different, that response will also be different. It's not a one-size-fits-all response. If we speak in terms of revelation, God responds to the questions we pose, to the questions we come with. And for that reason, there will be differences in formulations, in intellectual formulations, but in religious rituals, religious practices, in that whole area. So, but thanks very much for that, bringing up the challenge or the problem of making, devising, creating, shaping liturgical and religious acts that are really, truly welcoming and hospitable. Thanks.
Thank you for those responses. And I'd like to invite now either people here or those online with us to make comments or offer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your very inspiring experiences that you share with us. And I would like to ask something related to the role of women in Buddhism, for example. Especially, I had the opportunity to have some discussions on the role of nuns, Buddhist nuns, because somebody shared with me that sometimes in the big gatherings, but not only, but Buddhist nuns are really excluded because they are considered less than children as importance. And also, I was reading yesterday that the Pope, during his visit in Thailand, he will have as interpreter his cousin, who is a Salesian nun. And a very difficult moment for her will be when she will be interpreting the Buddhist leader, because she's not allowed to sit next to the Buddhist leader, so she will have to stay behind Pope Francis. So I would like to ask, maybe, I don't know, Sister Wei Wei could share a little bit about her experience or what her knowledge about this. So thank you very much.
Okay, my experience in Taiwan, I think now most of the main Buddhist temple, the men and women almost equal, especially like last year, Father William and we participate the dialogue between the women religious, Catholic women religious nun and the Buddhist nun, the dialogue, and we found many of them, they are the leaders of different department of the Buddhist that temple, even in their school, Buddhist school. But during the session, the seminar, I heard some southern, the Buddhism divided northern China. Chinese Buddhism belong to northern tradition, and Southeast Asia is southern. I listened some Buddhism from Thai and Myanmar. They shared because they are women, the nun, so they are not recognized by the Buddhism field, even the leaders. So I think different area or different tradition, the role of the Buddhist nun and monk are different. But of course, till now in Taiwan, the Buddhism, the mainstream, the leaders still are men. The monk is the master. So the women become some important head or chief of the department, but the main master still are men. But they are question our Catholic tradition. They said in the liturgy, the sisters or the women also cannot, organize or become the main celebrant. So we just say, oh, it's our tradition. Yes.
Thank you. I don't know if Father Peter or Father William would like to say what the situation is in Japan, as far as they know.
What concerns Japan, the Buddhist priests, there is education for the men, there is education for the women. It is done separately, but they can have the same level. When it comes to the head of a religious tradition, then it depends whether it is a lay movement or a monastic tradition. But there you don't see so many women who are at the head of a Buddhist school. You do see that with the modern traditions, modern schools, where there is a combination of Buddhism, Christianity, even Shintoism. And there you can have also women who are at the head of the Buddhist school, of the school there. So that you have, but it's indeed also that we have to watch out always with these preconceptions, no? And a good translator is sitting behind the person and not next to the person, whether it is a man or a woman. And there are, I remember when I was in India, for instance, in Belgium, we can touch women, but there you may not touch a woman, no, because that's almost like asking for marriage. So you have to know what you can do and what you cannot do in every tradition, even not only in a religious tradition, but in a setting. So if you speak in the Japanese tradition, it is normal in the Japanese tradition that on official occasions the woman is a bit behind the man. Yeah? That is, you can see that as discrimination, but it is a habit, and yeah. What to do about it? Religious should give the example that we are all equal. No? Within the Buddhist tradition, no, it is from in the beginning with the teaching of the Buddha that for his monks, he saw that women were very dangerous. You lose easily a monk, and not only in their tradition, but in the Christian Catholic tradition also, because of a beautiful woman. No? So as a monk, you have to be aware of it, and the system also helps you not to be too much tempted. See? So you can even see that as a respect for the woman, that the woman should be behind, no? So that the man should not look at her in a wrong way, no? But yeah, I don't want to say that but we have to see all angles and see when it is really a discrimination from the heart or it is more a cultural setting. Thank you. Father William.
Father William, did you want to add anything to that question?
No. Father Peter did it very well. Thank you.
Thank you. But I think there was a distinction there between religious tradition and social customs. But with each, I think that makes a big difference when we know why. What is the reason behind? How has this come about? And without that knowledge, we can cause offense as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from the English group that is very similar to the previous one, but is not more related about women and men in general. So I'm going to read it. Sister Wei Wei spoke about equality in the Buddhist religion. So I would like to know what they're taking on gender in issues. Do men and women have equal roles? I think that part was also answered, but I don't know if they want to add something.
Okay, I after listening to Father Peter, I will add more. In Taiwan, we have a different kind of system of Buddhism and stream. Some are mixed. The temple mixed. There are Buddhist monk and Buddhist nun. That group, the head, usually, often, are men. But the women will take, just I mentioned before, will take the head of important department. But some Buddhism pure, all are women. That means the Buddhist nun. In that case, of course, the woman is the head of the Buddhist. All are women. So mixed, still the man has a more important power or role. But in last 20 years, I think several important Buddhist nuns outspoken and voice out for equal leadership, equal gender. And in the beginning, the society was surprised or shocked, but later, little by little, got used. So now I think the status of Buddhist nun is the higher compared with the previous previous time. Yes.
Do we have any further questions or points for discussion?
We have another one from the English floor. What could be the basic things to know about Buddhism before starting to dialogue with Buddhists? I will repeat it. What could be the basic things to know about Buddhism before starting to dialogue with Buddhists? Father William?
Well, I could, it's a difficult question. As I say, my background has not been academic. My background has been almost entirely experiential. But I think it's important to know that when we think of a religious or a spiritual tradition, at the very center of it is some notion of or understanding of faith in a God. We can't conceive of a religion, I think, which is not centered on God. And I think one of the things, at least if I understand it correctly, is that that is not the fundamental question for the Buddhist. The fundamental question for the Buddhist is more, how does my mind work? How does what is mind? And very much a sense of what am I? Is there an I? Is there a me? And of course, that fundamental question of why is there suffering? And how can one put an end to suffering? This is not to say that Buddhists are atheists, but Buddhists are non-theists. For them, in a certain sense, if I understand correctly, they simply say, that's not the immediate question that we're involved with. We're involved with the question of why do I suffer, and how can suffer? Why am I dissatisfied? Why am I never sensing that my life is full? And how do we move beyond that? How do we put an end to suffering? So that to me would be important, because I think otherwise we enter into a relationship with a Buddhist thinking that we're on the same wavelength, that we're both interested in the question of who is God for me? How do I become closer to God? How is God present in my life? How do I know whether I'm doing the will of God? And the Buddhist is simply not asking those questions. And so that I think we have to be aware of. But I'd like to hear Father Peter's response to this. A much deeper response, I'm sure, that I've been able to give.
Yeah. Yes, it's nice dialoguing with the two of you in public. It's indeed Buddhism. When I teach Buddhism at university to the students, I start with taking the topic of karma, because you cannot understand Buddhism if you don't understand what is karma. Sister Wei Wei has mentioned it a bit, but it is the experience of the Buddha that there is so much suffering in the world, and he wanted to know what is the cause of suffering. Yeah? There is suffering in the world. What is the cause? What is the promise that there is an end to the suffering, and the way to make that end of the suffering is the meditation, and that are the four basic truths of Buddhism. So, if you want to dialogue with Buddhists, you have to realize first a bit your own suffering. Mostly we are so aware, we think that we are so happy, and we don't see that we make sometimes others very unhappy with our happiness. No? So that is entering into their world, the world of suffering. And that's indeed, as Father William said, the world of I have to understand myself because of my ego, the wrong understanding of my ego, so much troubles comes to me and to others. So it's working, cleaning up your own dirt, no? But then, and there is where we can start talking with them, when you clean up your mind, and your mind becomes pure as a mirror, then you start to be able to reflect in your own heart the feelings of another person, the unity of this world, and you become little by little to understand who is God. And that's why I'm now working on a book with the title, The God of Buddhism, just to challenge that idea that there is no God in Buddhism. It's not true. And the good Buddhists will say that, but the Western Buddhists, they will rapidly say, yeah, you want to make Buddhism again Catholic. No? But that's not the idea. The idea is that if you look to their deep religious mystical experiences, that we come very close to the experiences we Christians have of God. Thank you.
I would like to add just a little bit to that, Father Peter. And again, I'll use an experience I had in a session I made with Harada Roshi in Sogenji. And I came in for my Doksan. He works usually with a translator, but in this time, he said to me in that typical Rinzai Roshi way, very strong, very intense, "Where is God?" he said to me. And I answered, "Everywhere." And he struck his fist in his hand and he said, "No," loudly. And then he asked me again, "Where is God?" And I'm getting a little uneasy now. And I said, "Inside." And he again struck his fist and he said, "No." And then he rang the bell and told me to leave. The next day I came back and now he was a little more, a little less intense, I would say. And he simply said to me, "Where is God?" And I just shrugged my shoulders. And he said, "Yes, yes," he said, "put aside your idea of God, your ideas about God, and then you will find God." So I think you're very much onto something with that book you are writing. And that's one of the things I think I most learned from my experience with the Japanese Zen school is, and I'm far from it yet, but how to break through our preoccupation with naming, defining, getting clear and straight ideas, and how to come to an experiential knowledge of the reality itself, not with our idea or our thoughts or what we think and what we judge. And that really comes down to me to be one of the fundamental teachings of Jesus too. And it hit me very strongly in Japan when I read that passage in the Gospels where Jesus says, "Stop judging." And the Japanese translation is "sabakuna." And that is the most intense way you can give an imperative. It's almost impolite. Just stop your judging, for heaven's sake. You're judging all the time. Let the reality itself be present to you. So I'm looking forward to that book.
They like me to say at least one word. Well, in the book, I like to, one of the things I will come to is that for the Buddhist, the mind is God. And if you understand the mind in its fullness, it is as we understand God, you can say. That's where I want to come to. Thank you very much, and I will contact you later about the book. Thank you.
Thank you. do the other speakers wish to add one final word?
Yeah, right. For me, in case we will dialogue with the Buddhist, it will be better start from the experience, because the many experience we have come up. So at least start the open attitude. Like before, I have worked in social service for many years, especially working for the suffering people. So the Buddhist people, they said, I'm like a living Buddha. For them, this is a way of contemplation, living active contemplation. So we can share a lot. But when we go to the deeper, I think for me, Jesus Christ still is very important. When I share, sometimes I face the difficulty to work, to struggle with the victim of migrant workers, or with many suffering people. I share Jesus Christ will, for me, it's like they are the Christ. But for them, for Buddhism, they don't use, they will say they are Buddha. The suffering people also are living Buddha. But they emphasize, cultivate them own self. So, but for me, when I face the limitation of my struggle, the reason law or the power of God will appear the influence to me. But for the Buddhist, they don't agree with that. So I think that it is a difference between the two. So when we go to dialogue to this point, what we only can mutual respect each other. But I so there how to say that, they emphasize meditation, contemplation, to get to understand the equality of people, to get a merciful point of view. So meditation, contemplation is very important. This also helped me. I think we also can benefit from there. Yeah.
I would agree with that completely.
And Father William, do you have one last word for us?
Yes, I was just going to say I agree completely with Sister Weiwei about the importance of it being based in experience, and the importance of giving witness. If Christ is central for us, that can't just be something we say, it has to be somehow apparent in our lives. And that is the best kind of witness that one can give. To that I would add, at least to me it's been very important, that dialogue works best in the context of friendship. If you have entered into a relationship of friendship, and in this particular case with particular Buddhists, the dialogue is something that becomes quite natural. And it's not just dialogue about religious beliefs or practices, it's just dialogue about living, about what it means to live a full human life. Again, go back to Saint Irenaeus, the glory of God is the human being fully alive. And if somehow we can be honest and fully alive in friendship with another, then that's the best possible kind of dialogue, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all those who've helped to prepare this webinar and those who have participated. And thank you particularly to our three speakers. Thank you for sharing from your own experience. This really makes issues alive and so much more easier for us to enter into what you have been sharing. It's really very much appreciated. The theme, hospitality and contemplation, has led during the afternoon, I think, to echoes of patience, openness, welcome, receiving others, all of which we need so much more in our world today. We've been looking at the Buddhist context, but those qualities are needed in every sphere of our lives. So thank you very much for sharing your experience and your knowledge. And really thank you for the reminders that we receive from that of how we need to go forward today. Thank you, everyone.
And a special thanks to Sister Armida, who has guided us through this dialogue also.